at the end of this. So our next contributor is Becky Rowe from a very well-known and distinguished research agency called Revealing Reality. She's worked for a great many famous brands, including Pepsi Cola and Number 10 Downing Street. I don't have a problem with Pepsi Cola. But obviously, that's a hallmark of the quality of the work that they're recognised for. We can't always pick our clients, can we? Becky, over to you.
Thanks, John. And I'm just going to share my screen now. Hopefully this will work. I can still just see myself. I'm not sure if you can see my slides. I'm just going to start speaking, and then hopefully one of the tech people will either share slides in the background, or it says my screen sharing's been paused on my screen, so I'm not sure if that's what you want or not. But I will just start talking. So my presentation today is about what children think should happen, and it actually includes children and parents in our research that we've been doing. And from an EU consent point of view, it's absolutely vital that we're including the views of children and parents in the research that we're doing and in the design work that we're doing. So we have a number of moments throughout the project where we are trying to ensure that young people's views are being incorporated. The piece of work that I'm going to talk to you about now is a formative piece of research that's done very early in the project, before we've done any design work itself, to try and ensure that young people and parents' views are very foundational in all of the work we do and sort of central to the thinking. So combining the kind of legal knowledge that you've heard Abhilash and Simone talking about already, but also with the kind of real world on the ground views of children and parents. And we also have a number of other moments in the project where we're going to be engaging with children and parents. For example, a whole range of co-design activities that will be happening during the design work itself. And as June mentioned earlier, a large-scale pilot where we'll be rolling out the product to over 1,000 children across 3 European countries. So really engaging with children and putting children's needs and experiences will be very much at the heart of what we're doing. I can see some toing and froing between mine and Sonia's slides. I don't know if you've got my slides there. So if we go to the next slide.
Hi, Becky. If you just keep talking, we're just catching up on some slide management at this end.
Okay, that's fine. So in terms of the objectives of what we were doing in this first phase of research, we were very much trying to gain a broad understanding of how different age verification solutions might work in practice. So looking at current behaviours around existing age-restricted products, so including parental engagement in those restrictions. So looking at how they control what children are able to access, the degree of supervision and oversight that parents have. We looked at a real broad range of issues, so alcohol purchasing, gambling, access to kind of different age-restricted media, for example, and trying to work out how in the real world parents were kind of overseeing these sort of age restrictions and how the sort of legal frameworks and parental judgment and decision making actually worked in practice. We also looked specifically at parental and child attitudes towards current parental controls, and also their attitudes towards the idea of age verification across different platforms. And we told them at a very high level how the new system could potentially work, and gain some very sort of preliminary feedback which can inform the design. But that preliminary feedback would be very much kind of overridden by what would then happen in the co-design stage. I still can't see any slides, but I'm happy to keep going. I'm assuming they'll catch up eventually. So in terms of the research that we did, it was all qualitative at this point. we spoke to around 25 families across 4 European countries. So the countries were Greece, Cyprus, Germany, and the UK. So when we say we spoke to families, what I mean is that we actually spoke to both children and parents, and we did those interviews separately to understand and be able to triangulate what parents were saying about how well they thought they supervised child access to age-restricted products, but also speaking to the children to understand how well they perceived themselves to be able to access age-restricted content. And as you can imagine, there was a slight difference in opinion about how effective parents' ability to accurately oversee children's access was. As June mentioned earlier, it was very, very important to us that we included a range of families that had high levels of need or who might present a challenge to the new AV system. So we included families who had additional needs, so such as children who have autism or learning disability. We also included, and very deliberately, a whole range of families who had family setups that might present challenges to a system that would, if it was designed around a kind of conventional 2.4 child family kind of setup. So where there were kind of families who had parents living in different locations, or where there were kind of multiple different adults that might be in a household, or multi-generational families. And we also included families that didn't have, that spoke multiple languages, for example, so that we could start to think about how the system would need to be designed in order to be as inclusive as it possibly could be. Obviously, within the scope of a 25 family study, we couldn't include every different kind of setup that you might want, but we have started to try to think about it from a diversity and inclusion perspective, not just from a kind of very mainstream family perspective. I'm expecting someone's going to tell me in a second if you need me to do something differently with my slides, but I'm happy to be slideless, if that's okay with everyone.
Becky, sorry. We just need somebody from your team to send us your slides, please. We don't seem to have any record of them at this end.
Oh, really? Okay. I tell you what, Ian, I'm just going to be slideless, and it will be a speech rather than a presentation, and it's fine because my slides are very light. They've just got headings on them anyway. So if everyone doesn't mind, I'll just carry on being slideless.
We're just crazy people living on the edge. You go slideless if you want to.
I am wearing clothes, but I won't have any slides. So sorry, I can't be with you all, and that's why it's creating technical challenges. So in terms of what we found, there's a really positive reception towards the idea of greater support around age restrictions, at least in principle. All of the families had experienced some problems, and the children themselves raised a whole range of things that concerned them about their internet use, people getting in touch with them, adults getting in touch with them, or content that they'd found upsetting. So children and adults, broadly supportive. They think it's a good thing. And they really want additional support, and they find the current setup quite hard and time consuming to kind of really manage, and it's not very practical how things currently work. So a lot of parents had effectively given up, or some had gone totally the other way and kind of become extremely controlling around how young people access the internet. And most felt there should be some sort of middle way that enabled young people to have freedom and to be able to explore the internet and to be able to use the internet in a way that benefited them, but without being exposed to kind of the worst parts of it and harm. So, but one of the important caveats that families told us, and that is that they would like to have parental discretion. They do not want a system that is tyrannical or that prevents children from accessing content. And the parents were quite keen on this because they believe that they know their children best, and they would like to be able to say, well, I believe my child is able to access this kind of content even if it's not age appropriate, and that reflects their behavior in other age appropriate age restricted products. So that some parents are saying, well, my child's allowed to have a small glass of wine with dinner, or I let my child play Call of Duty even though they're too young because I do it with them, and with my help I'm able to kind of explain to them and monitor the risk. So they didn't want a system that would prevent them from being able to use their parental judgment in in enabling their child to have those experiences. And so this was a real tension in terms of kind of who was going to decide and how would parents make that decision. And one very important thing that they also mentioned was they didn't want it to be time consuming. So do they have to sign off every single bit of access, or how would that work in practice? How would, they don't want to be sent a notification every single time a child accesses something that's age appropriate, because it just take too much time given how much their children were using the internet. Parents also told us that they were worried about a system that was designed for very young children being applied to other children as they grew up, and the children themselves, their views, they were very concerned about this. And the children were quite funny, because they always were talking, however old they were, they always talked about younger children needing to be protected. So a 10-year-old would tell us that the 7-year-olds would need to be protected, and the 7-year-olds would tell us that the 5-year-olds needed to be protected, and so on. And they always thought they were sort of broadly old enough to be able to manage it themselves. But that does raise the question about how we design a system that is appropriate for children as they grow and is able to deal with different degrees of maturity and life stage. So, recognizing that a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old has very different needs when it comes to internet consumption than a 10-year-old. And that's a really important challenge for the system. Finally, children were very open in telling us about their workarounds for safety measures that were put in place. And we've got a whole long list, which I'm not going to go over now, but they were extremely creative in trying to identify ways to be able to kind of circumnavigate the measures that their parents and others put in place. And sometimes these workarounds were actively supported by parents, and parents had told children how to use them, or older siblings, for example, and they were complicit in this. So I think something that we need to bear in mind is that if the system does not work for parents and children, they will all find ways to work around it, and therefore the value and benefits of it will be kind of greatly reduced. So bearing in mind what parents and children are saying their needs are is vitally important in order to ensure compliance and that they actually use the system and get the benefits from it. There are also a whole range of practical considerations that we're going to be factoring into the design, and have already been shared with the designers. So, for example, families sharing devices is a very big challenge. In a family that has tablets or laptops or even phones, children and older siblings and parents are swapping those devices interchangeably, and that will create challenge. I mentioned earlier these worries about the parents receiving many notifications and needing to be constantly vigilant and constantly providing consent. That's a big concern. They don't want age verification to become a massive chore. Obviously, there are obvious fears around surveillance and privacy, and Simone mentioned a few of those in her presentation, but this is a very real concern for parents. They want to ensure the privacy for their children, but also there's growing concerns around, and the parents realise this themselves, that some of the concerns that were put in place, some of the measures that were put in place may also cause friction around adult access to the internet, and that was very much something that they wanted us to also think about. So yes, they're my main points. I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Thanks very much indeed, Becky, again underscoring the quality, depth and range of the research that this project is engaging with.